A very good morning and welcome to your favorite Sunday morning program, Media Monitor, the show that brings you robust discussions on stories that made headlines throughout this week. We're live here on the SABC News Channel 44. I'm your host, Alicia Jali. Yes, it's me. Good morning and thank you so much for tuning in. Let's take a quick look at what we have coming up this morning. We start by discussing Eskom confessing to misleading the country about a 1.6 billion rand payment it made to the Gupta Trillian. We also interrogate why the Hawks have now revived an old investigation looking into the rogue unit at SARS. We also touch on the story about a Walter Sisulu University student who received 14 million rand from the National Student Financial Aid Scheme. And finally, we look into the current political climate in Kenya post the announcement to annul the recent presidential election. But first, as always, it's 9 a.m. These are the news headlines. Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa has lost a court bid to stop the Sunday Independent newspaper from publishing claims over an alleged sex scandal which implicates him. The South Gauteng High Court found that Ramaphosa had not placed sufficient evidence to show that the matter was urgent. On Friday night, the social media post surfaced showing the editor of the Sunday Independent, Steve Motale, asking Ramaphosa to comment on those allegations that have been leveled against him. And they accuse him of extramarital affairs with several young women. But the deputy president refuted these posts as a smear campaign. President Jacob Zuma is scheduled to hold bilateral talks with his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping on the sidelines of the 9th BRICS summit held in the coastal city of Xiamen. The three-day summit will today discuss the implementation of the new strategies to accelerate global trade, investment and technology. It is attended by leaders of the 5 major emerging economies groupings, which also include Russia, India and Brazil. And Lewis Hamilton has broken Michael Schumacher's pole positions record by taking the 69th of his career. The Brit moved level with the German 7-time world champion in Belgium last week and followed that up at the Italian Grand Prix with his 8th pole of the season. Hamilton's first pole position came in his 6th race, the 2007 Canadian Grand Prix. He converted that into his very first career victory. Right, as tradition on the digital front, let's welcome SABC digital news producer Ms. Buchule Putini. Buchule, good morning, you.
Morning, Alicia. How are you?
Beautiful hair.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
All right, and of course, on the main set, we have analyst Tebogo Detsejo, as well as media analyst Mr. Tebogo Detsejo, as well as political analyst Professor Stephen Friedman. A very good morning, gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning, Alicia.
Good morning.
All right, and we do have in our Pretoria studios Professor Tenye Komaluleko, who joins us from there. A very good morning to you, Prof. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Good morning, Alicia. Always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure to have you too, Prof. Now we shift our focus for a quick update on the trending stories on social media this past week. Buchule, take it away. What was the biggest hashtag?
It has been a very busy week.
Very busy.
Very busy week, but the latest that is trending at the moment, Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa has lost a court bid to stop the Sunday Independent newspaper from publishing an alleged sex scandal, which implicates him. Now, the Gauteng High Court on Saturday found that Ramaphosa had not placed sufficient evidence to show that the matter was urgent. Let's see what the tweet on Twitter says.
What are they saying on
Lawrence Dube says, NDZ and Zuma people be like, how can you believe newspapers? Media is fooling. Now that hashtag Ramaphosa leaks is out, you see it's true. What is the truth? Hashtag Ramaphosa.
Oh my goodness, let's look at more tweets. African Spring there says it's a bit fuzzy. It says the media is a hashtag Ramaphosa factions through zero criticism. Imagine if these emails were about someone in the Zuma camp. Okay.
Now Felix Mutaung says at AM live on SAFM. So these Ramaphosa emails are dirty tricks, but the Gupta leaks are not. How does that work?
Very interesting. I want to hear commentary from the gentleman. Debok, I'm sure you've filled yourself up to your cup is full from looking at the analysis on Twitter. How has Twitter reacted to all these allegations against the Deputy President?
Well, I think they've reacted. You've covered it very accurately. There's a duplicity of opinions.
Yeah.
I'm not sure whether or not this particular story is that important, particularly because, I mean, it's his personal life, but that's the essence of leadership. You will be tested on how you behave personally and professionally, but I'm not sure if it has an impact on his leadership skills, and as a person, I'm not sure if that has much of an impact.
Professor Friedman?
Well, I don't think it's going to have much political impact because, just remember, since we became a democracy, we've never actually had a president who had one partner for their entire life. It's not a big issue in South African politics. But I think most importantly, to me, I think we need to clarify what's going on here. This is not the right of the media to take on power. This is the right of the media to tell us what dirt some people in power have over other people in power. And when the person there says, well, what is the difference? The difference is, what does this mean to the average South African? Okay, if I reveal that people are fixing the bread price or people are stealing money from pensioners, that's of concern to the average South African. The question of what politicians do in their private lives doesn't really affect anybody. So I think this idea that this is a wonderful blow for freedom of the media, when media start taking on powerful people in the interests of the ordinary South African, that's when we can say it's a victory for media freedom.
Professor Maluleke, let's find out from you. What is your view in this whole debacle?
I couldn't agree more with Stephen. You know, I really don't know how significant this scandal is going to be in the long term. Granted, you know, the English expression about nothing is fair in love and war. There is love and there is war in this story, and I suppose that the leadership skills of Ramaphosa and his moral stature is what is being attacked here. But you know, as Steve says, in that department, we haven't really been very lucky as far as our leadership is concerned. And that it comes at this time, clearly the gloves are off, the time for campaigning has begun, and dirt will be thrown around, and this is the beginning of it.
All right. Bukule, please go ahead and take us through the next big hashtag.
Now, Alicia, one of the top stories this week was the story of son of the president, Duduzane Zuma. In an interview with the BBC, he has denied involvement in alleged corruption despite his links with the controversial Gupta family. Now, people reacted to the interview.
What are they saying?
People are saying, Uvela P. Mugwebo says, he says he is likable, Duduzane that is, but he and his father are feeling the pressure now. He thinks it is a joke.
More tweets there. Africa is a country, says, asking for a South African friend. What is with hashtag state capture crowd? First one of the Guptas, now Duduzane, only giving interviews to the BBC.
And Enoch Mtembu says, thanks to Duduzane, must enjoy luxurious life before we tackle him and sent to tough life in prison. He will be traumatized like Shabir Sheikh.
Is that the last of our tweets?
That's the last of our tweets from that story.
Professor Friedman, what do you think? What do you make of these developments?
Well, I think we are going to talk about it a bit more. I just wonder if we're getting to the stage, and there are some indications where even people in politics who supported the president are going to start ditching the Guptas. There is a sign of this. So, you know, I think that what the president's son said in that interview is not going to have terribly much credibility among politicians across the spectrum at the moment, because I think the tide is really moving away from the Gupta family.
A very quick one. Let's look at the last big hashtag. Bukule, we're almost out of time. What was the
Finally
big hashtag?
was Kenya, and the Supreme Court, when it announced that on Friday that the Electoral Board committed irregularities during last month's presidential presidential vote harming the integrity of the election that handed President Uhuru Kenyatta a second 5-year term.
Okay.
Now, people on social media, Masika says, Uhuru thinks he owns Kenya. Let him not underestimate the power of the marginalized. Polite warning.
You've been warned. Champion Boy says, I have waited so long for Raila to be Kenya's president. Now I feel it coming. Yeah, I see it coming.
and finally, Amaganji Thomas says, hashtag Supreme Court decides, and he says, Kenya, we have to fix the third respondent in the next 58 days so that he doesn't fix the hashtag Supreme Court.
Mikora, please. Tebogo, a quick comment from you.
Well, I think this is a victory for the independence of the judiciary in Kenya.
Yeah.
As you've known that, since 2007, elections have been subject to a lot of debate. I mean, a lot of people died in 2007 after the elections. And so I think that this is good that we're seeing, people being held accountable. And I really hope that we can also relook at how the observers, are conducting themselves at elections, because this is now egg on their face.
Absolutely. All right, Bukule, do give our viewers that URL so that they can get the rest of these stories and all the other stories that our digital front will be covering throughout the day.
For the latest news updates, you can go on www.sabc.co.za/news, and you can watch videos on our SABC Digital News on YouTube, our YouTube page, and on Twitter you can find us on @SABC News Online.
All right, thank you, Bukule. Will Eskom be held fully accountable for misleading the country about a payment it made to Trillian and then lying about it? Well, find out. All the analysis is coming up after this break. Welcome back. Power utility Eskom admitted to lying to the country about a 1.6 billion rand payment it made to Gupta company Trillian and financial advisory firm and global consultancy McKinsey this past week. Public Enterprises Minister Lynn Brown has since demanded an explanation from the parastatal about its relationship and dealings with Trillian Capital Holdings after discovering that she was misled about irregular payments. The Eskom board will submit its report to Brown by supposed to admit their report by end of business on Friday. And of course, she's given them many deadlines. I mean, what do you think still needs to happen yet? Tebogo, what is the issue here at Eskom? I mean, they lied about 1.6 billion rand. And mind you, this was a public hearing.
I think Professor Stephen Friedman said something very profound earlier on, where he said, when it affects the poorest of the poor, then I think it's of public interest. And I believe that this particular matter is definitely of public interest. You've got 1.6 billion rand that's unaccounted for. And you went and you accounted and you said that this has been above board, and we can confirm with an external agency, which is a management consultancy based in New York. And you find that it's not true. You lied about it. And I think in order for the public to have confidence in our parastatals, specifically Eskom in this matter, I think they need to push it towards the criminal front. I think criminal charges need to be laid against them for financial misconduct, for corruption. I think it should be beyond just going, to the minister and saying, well, this is what happened. I think they need to take this matter further in order to show the public that we are serious about corruption, we are serious about holding people accountable, and the suspension is not enough of the CFO. At some point, the CFO needs to be dismissed because this has been confirmed. And so that is what I think would bring back confidence to the public. But also, whoever is incumbent into the position needs to be someone who is scrupulous, who is qualified. It should be based on merit, and somebody who can now, reverse what has happened and ensure that moving forward, everything is done according to the book.
Professor Maluleka, what do you think about this debacle? Do you think we're still going to hear more shocking revelations from Eskom?
Well, I mean, it doesn't get more shocking than this. I mean, nearly 2 billion rands passed between McKinsey and Trillian. And in fact, Eskom did not even have a proper agreement with Trillian. They're supposed to have had an agreement with McKinsey. My sense is that what happened at Eskom is really the tip of the iceberg as far as the rot that is taking place in our SOEs. And I think it will be necessary to push for criminal charges. But where was the minister all along? I mean, I think it is quite interesting that the minister has suddenly woken up and asked for a report when there are indications that warnings have been sounded about this as early as last year already. So, I think what we need is an audit of dealings that our SOEs have been involved in, and really to take the state capture allegations seriously. I mean, we're still waiting for a commission until now. So I don't know that this piecemeal approach will take the country any further.
Prof, what do you think? Who should be held accountable? Deboho feels it's the chairperson. Is it the entire board? Is it, No,
I agree with my colleagues. Look, I think certainly several people have to be held accountable. I mean, first of all, one trend which is worth watching is that we now, in the Cash Pay Master Services case, we have the possibility that ministers and other officials could have to pay personally for the legal action, and that would change things quite dramatically. The other issue here, which is very important, is that we're seeing the involvement of companies which have tended to be regarded as above reproach and respectable. So McKinsey is involved here. KPMG has been involved in the state capture issue. It depends on whether you think Bell Pottinge is respectable or not, but they're another example. So what we're seeing is that, as my colleagues are saying, this rot goes far deeper. We're dealing here with collusion between people who are trying to defraud the taxpayer, and it seems that some quite prominent companies are involved. I think what is interesting about this politically, it's part of this ongoing fight about state capture, about control of the state. And as I said earlier, what I think may be happening is that the reason we're seeing these revelations, and that's obviously very important that we do see them, is because the tide is now moving in a particular direction. Very interestingly, Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, the presidential candidate who the president is supporting, has publicly endorsed the idea of a commission of inquiry, has publicly said that she thinks that the previous public protector state capture report needs to be taken seriously. Now, this seems to indicate that there is a growing agreement in the political class that we have to act on this. And I think, obviously, as citizens, we need to hold them accountable for what they're saying.
But, Debo, I mean, Oliver Weinman had alluded to the fact that there was something dubious about this contract and that it shouldn't be allowed to go through. And yet Eskom still went through ahead with that contract. I mean, what happens now if you can't have people that are supposed to be advisory doing their work and you're just going to ignore that advice? So what's the point of having them there?
Well, firstly, Oliver Weinman red flagged this issue. And so that is why it came out. And it's quite shocking that you would receive specific advice and go totally against them towards the direction in which my colleagues are discussing around state capture. And I would even go further. It is also the Limpopo province, Mpumalanga, Gauteng, KZN province, the leadership within the ANC who have said that they would like to distance themselves from this family. And it is correct. The tide is turning against them. But what I think we are currently seeing is the last kicks of a dying horse. That horse needs to die. It's very important for us to move forward and work towards transforming, our country. And a lot of what we are seeing and some of the topics that we're going to discuss later, some of them are just side issues. I think it is time that we start to discuss the core issues. The 2.1 million people who are living in shacks. We need to start discussing how we're going to eradicate those shacks. Instead of only, focusing on this faction and that faction is looking, towards power.
Professor Maluleke, do you think this deal went through? I mean, in the time of Brian Molefe, shouldn't he then also be brought back into the fore to answer questions pertaining to these irregularities in the contract?
Not only him, Dr. Ngubane as well, and the board. The board of Eskom needs to be taken. Certainly, the entire board, because they are the governance structure. Yeah. And we need to understand whose instructions were they taking. Absolutely. Yeah. Who was really dictating terms? Because it seems to me that there is a hand, that was directing things there. And I think we need to get to that if we ever will get to the bottom of what was going on at Eskom.
All right, well, let's take a quick ad break. After that, the Hawks insist that reopening an old investigation into the SARS rogue unit is not about Pravin Gordhan. Find out more after this break. Well, a very good morning and welcome to AM News live at 10:00 hours across all Central Africa regions.
A fitting send-off for a revolutionary giant, a life dedicated in service of the people.
The result means that Swallows are out of the ABC Multiple League and drop to the amateur fourth tier of South African football, the SAB League.
Tune in on AM News every Saturday and Sunday from 10 hours.
Well, the Hawks have revived an old investigation looking into the rogue unit at SARS regarding, of course, that is establishment of that investigative unit at the South African Revenue Services when he was still commissioner. The Hawks are looking into the role Gordhan played in the so-called rogue intelligence unit, which was allegedly intended to spy on politicians and plant surveillance equipment inside the offices of the National Prosecuting Authority. The Hawks have reportedly asked former Finance Minister Pravin and his one-time Deputy Jabu Moleketi to provide affidavits on the controversial unit. However, Gordhan had previously denied any wrongdoing in the establishment of the unit. Professor Maluleke, do you really think that this investigation is not about Pravin Gordhan, as the Hawks have indicated?
You've got to give it to whoever is determined. I mean, the resilience of the people who want to investigate the rogue unit is amazing. I only hope that we had a quarter of that tenacity deployed to deal with the very issues we were talking about earlier, state capture, all the mounting evidence of wrongdoing that is being ignored in the country, and how this matter that of a rogue unit, which may or may not have done all the things that it is supposed to have done 10 years ago. I mean, how Pravin and now Trevor Manuel and everyone is going to be prosecuted essentially, when there's so much more work that is happening now that ought to be done. That said, if there's any wrongdoing as far as the rogue unit is concerned, I think we should hear about it. I am personally very skeptical of the Hawks at the moment and their priorities. I think that their priorities beg a lot of questions as far as this issue is concerned.
Professor Friedman?
I think, look, the first thing that we have to say, I think which is very important, nobody has yet produced any evidence in public which shows that there was any wrongdoing.
True.
I think that needs to be stressed. Secondly, I think what we're seeing here is something very important. We're seeing that the battles within government, the battles within the state, don't stop when particular individuals are removed from their post. So the battle for Treasury is going on despite the fact that Minister Gordhan and Deputy Minister Jonas are no longer in their offices. The same battle, and this is part of that battle. It's people trying to take over the Treasury, it's people trying to defend the Treasury. On the same basis, we were told that when General Ntlemeza was in charge of the Hawks, General Ntlemeza was the problem. It's now becoming clear that General Ntlemeza was part of the problem, but he's not the only part of the problem, because General Ntlemeza left behind him 2 generations of leadership in the Hawks who have exactly the same agenda as General Ntlemeza has. So what we're seeing is, you know, we tend to read very often and hear very often that if this person is removed or that person is removed, the situation changed. We're seeing very strong evidence that that is not the case. This battle continues regardless of who are in those posts.
But why so much interest in this investigation, Tebogo? I mean, this was opened and closed, and you know, it didn't get very far the last time that they started with the investigation.
Well, the investigation has zero credibility, specifically after what happened last year when he was publicly charged. And
then the charges were subsequently withdrawn.
Quietly, the charges were withdrawn. And after that, after all the political escapades, the individual is removed as the finance minister. But it seems as if they haven't removed themselves from dealing with the finance minister. And I want to go into the essence of the debate in my particular opinion. You know, essentially, if you look at an organization, any organization that you're trying to build, you cannot have people who are fighting each other within the organization, let it be even publicly fighting each other. Yeah. Because that is not just betrayal of comrades and colleagues and acquaintances. You're betraying the organization itself. And it cannot be that the purpose of being in an organization is to take power. The purpose of being in the ANC should be to serve the people. Initially, it was to unite and to liberate the people. It cannot be for you to get power and to do it by any means necessary. I think that in that particular issue, the ANC needs to now rein in on its members, on its leaders, regional and national leaders, to say that, guys, we actually need to come together, you know, try to unite the organization, you know, moving to Gallagher Estate in December. Yeah. But currently what we are seeing is a bunch of infighting, a lot of sideshows, a lot of things that don't make any sense coming to the fore, and we're not seeing, you know, the service of the people. That is what the organization is supposed to be all about, not just the ANC, but also some of the other political parties. So we need to see more harmony within the ANC. And we need to see people working together in order to, you know, further economically liberate the people.
But Professor Friedman, let's talk about this. I mean, the allegations here, the Hawks are trying to get to the bottom of the fact that I think one of the biggest allegations is that this unit was merely planted to spy on certain members or politicians at the NPA. Aren't those serious charges? Shouldn't we get to the bottom of this for once and for all?
Alicia, they're serious charges if you produce evidence to back them up. So far, they haven't produced any evidence to back them up. And everything they've said has then been refuted. So they say it was a rogue unit, it didn't have permission. And then the other side says, but here's the minute of the cabinet where they got permission. I mean, you know, unless they have evidence which they have not shown us, this is a political witch hunt. And it's a political witch hunt which is about taking over the Treasury. What they're trying to do, okay, Gordhan and Jonas are not in their jobs anymore. What they're trying to do is undermine the credibility of the people who've run the Treasury so far, including Trevor Manuel, including Jabu Moleketi. So that what they're going to say is, you see, the Treasury's always been run by a bunch of crooks, and we're going to come and save the Treasury from the crooks.
Oh, my word.
I think, you know, if you look at what's happening at Eskom and Trillian, we can tell a different story about who the problem is and who the people who are being victimized are. But, you know, I think the other thing which is not getting enough coverage is, and this is all in court papers which I've read, this whole attempt to take over SARS is actually, according to court papers I've read, it's about illegal cigarette smuggling. Yeah. It's about people who try to take out investigators who are investigating them for an illegal act. So I think that, you know, it's very interesting that particular stories get told about this. What I'm telling you now is not secret information. Anybody who looks at the affidavits which was presented to the court can say the same thing. And I think it's unfortunate that we don't see enough of this in the media coverage. Any media person can go and access the same documents and tell readers what they're saying.
Prof. Maluleka, do you think, as Professor Friedman is saying, this is just a political witch hunt? Very quickly.
Oh, yes. It definitely is a political witch hunt. Unless, you know, someone can prove otherwise. How long have they been trying to stick this case on Pravin and Trevor and others? They've been trying so hard, almost too hard. You know, so I have no doubt that this is a witch hunt, but the real reason for it has to do with the current political contestations. It has to do with the attempt to talk about white monopoly capital as a way of displacing state capture debate. It all has to do with that. And of course it has to do with December 2017 as well.
All right. After the break, we look into the Anus versus 14 million rand blunder. It's coming up after this break.
All right, we talk about a healthy lifestyle, but what is this healthy lifestyle?
What we're talking about really is you are healthy in those three areas of life: body, mind, and soul.
Before you embark on a weight loss journey, rather first speak to your person who has your complete clinical picture.
Ideally, your plate should look like this. Half of your plate should be fruit and vegetables. A quarter of your plate, starch. Quarter protein.
Show you some of the things that I really enjoy doing for that bottom pouch as well as for cardio. So you do your kicks, you kick back.
Join Health Talk every Saturday for all your health news.
Welcome back. While tertiary funding remains one of the country's biggest challenge, this past week a Walter Sisulu University student allegedly squandered well over 800,000 rand in just 71 days after 14.1 million rand was accidentally deposited into her account by the National Student Financial Aid Scheme. The Walter Sisulu University confirmed it is investigating how the amount could have gone unnoticed for such a long time. The shocking revelations came after a receipt showing the whopping amount on the student's account was leaked onto social media. The student and their friends reportedly lived a high life. The card has since been blocked. Michael Ansel, Chief Executive of Intellimali, which manages the allocation of funds at the Walter Sisulu University Students IntelliCard, said the firm will take legal action against the student for not reporting the bundle, and the SIU has reportedly been approached to assist in this matter. Here's more on this clip.
A deposit that's left egg on the face of officials. The student went on a wild spree, spending money on iPhones and lavish parties. Now the Higher Education Minister wants answers.
The investigation also we want must even go to the detail. Was this an error really?
The money was deposited by the university's service provider Intellimali in June this year, but the mistake was only picked up months later.
I have requested the department to actually just go and check why are some institutions using service providers to disperse some of NSFAS monies. Who pays for that? Is it being cut from the NSFAS money in order to pay a service provider?
Financial aid scheme NSFAS though says all lost monies will be recovered.
Those people who need to repay the money will repay the money. students who would have received or who are entitled to receive funding will receive funding as normal, and no student will be disadvantaged by this.
The service provider at the center of the storm has confirmed it will take legal action against the student. Mangoba Mkunu, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Professor Friedman, do you think there's more to the story? Do you smell him right here?
Well, I think that we should. I think that it's quite possible that what appears to be a funny story is not a funny story at all. And obviously what needs to be investigated, and what we need to make sure investigated possible, is, was this a mistake?
Yes.
Because it's quite possible that it wasn't a mistake. I mean, the allegation is, that doesn't necessarily reflect on the particular individual whose account it was. The allegation is that if you want to steal money from NSFAS, you put money in a particular account, you leave it there for a while, and then you withdraw it from that account. So I think, first of all, we need a proper investigation about whether there was criminal activity here. And then secondly, as you've heard from the clip, this question of, you know, we have this mania in this country about service providers. I mean, what on earth do you need a service provider for to pay out a NSFAS grant, for heaven's sake? You've got a record, you pay it out. So I think, first of all, the question of theft, but secondly, this question of, you know, we're talking about state capture here. The whole question of service providers who are brought in to provide services which really should be provided by public institutions, and then are paid for by the taxpayer, by poor South Africans. I mean, you know, even if there is no wrongdoing in this case, I think we need to insist that this particular practice be stopped.
Well, firstly, I don't know if my colleagues will agree, but I sympathize with the student who had that 14 million in her account.
Why do you sympathize?
Well, you know what?
She wasn't sympathetic to the money being in her account.
We can sit back and judge the student for all we want, but the student is young. We don't know the background of the student. And I think that students should be allowed to make mistakes, but not have it, you know, put in newspapers and online. Because if you look at it, the student can be rehabilitated. But the reputation of the student online will not be rehabilitated, because they've released her pictures, they've released her name and her surname. So I think in terms of sensitivity, instead of playing to the gallery in this instance, I think they should withdraw her name, withdraw her pictures, and just deal with the matter at hand. Now, in terms of the matter, it's absolutely shocking. I can't believe, you know, that 14 million rands can be mistaken for 1,400.
1,000, I mean, really?
And you go to institutions, and students are always crying in January and February around the fact that NSFAS money has dried up. And you ask yourself, how can your NSFAS application be approved, and then when you go to access it, it has dried up? And you look at how many people will be affected if that student is not able to access education in terms of her family, her community, his or her community. And I think that we need a larger investigation beyond this 14 million rands.
I mean, there was a protest about the very same issue that you're talking about, the fact that the students were talking about their NSFAS funds that were not in their accounts. Prof, quickly.
Just to add to what Boko is saying, those of us who are in the university system know how important this is. We have literally hundreds, if not more, of very bright postgraduate students who can't get the money they need to study. Some of us get approached by young people coming out of school who can't afford the 100 rand to register. So, you know, you have a situation, if you're stealing money from this, you are literally stealing the future of hundreds and thousands of South Africans. It's a major issue.
Professor Maluleka, what do you make of this debacle? Do you think there's some sort of corruption and a deeper level investigation needs to be conducted here?
Yeah, I really think this is to spit in the faces of poor students. I mean, it's to kick them in the teeth, if you like, because what was Fees Must Fall all about? It is about the lack of funding in higher education. And then to discover that the people, you know, entrusted with the task of distributing the funds are not rigorous at all. They don't really take care, because a mistake such as this speaks to the lack of rigor, but also the lack of sensitivity to the dire lack of funds in the system for students. And to be able to deposit that kind of amount of money for so long and not realizing what has happened. And then when I listen to the minister, I also worry, because the minister also seems not to understand or to know. Yes, he is completely shocked himself. So one wonders how serious is the problem? How seriously are we taking the problem of funding for higher education? But I also think, I mean, while I understand what Tebogo is saying about the student needing to be protected, what the actions of the student have shown is that there is an ethical problem across the board. You know, Intellimali is Trillian in miniature. And you could argue that what is happening is that throughout the system, we have a problem of ethics. And it goes up to the top. And that is everyone wants to get something for themselves, even when we know that there are 30 million South Africans living in poverty. And there are hundreds of thousands of students who ought to be funded, who for 3 months at least, the money that ought to have gone to them was sitting in one account. It's unbelievable that such a situation has been allowed to happen in this country.
Professor Maluleka, I mean, according to the Intellimali website and call center, the card can only be used at particular retailers. How did she then manage to spend money on luxury goods like iPhones, a Peruvian weave, and bottles of whiskey?
Well, I suppose, you know, if you have money in your account somewhere, you can always find a way of spending it. I mean, I don't really want to get into those, but I know of stories of funded students who stand outside certain bookshops and, you know, ask for exchange. In other words, they want cash. If you want a book, you know, they will buy it for you and you get cash. So there are all sorts of ways of finding ways of spending the money. But, you know, why did the money end up in her account in the first place?
Yes, that's the question. That's the big question. Tebogo?
I don't understand how the money ended up in her account. Everybody in this country should know about the Fees Must Fall protest. You should know when you're driving around the conditions in this country where we have one of the highest Gini coefficient rates.
Yeah.
We know poor people. We know that this country requires an educated citizenry in order for us to move forward.
Yeah.
And for you to now take the money of approximately 35 students could have benefited from that 14 million and had a full bursary that includes their residents, you know, taken away from them. You know, how much crime do we have in this country? The cause of crime is our socio-economic conditions, the gap between the rich and the poor. Yeah. And in order to tackle that, we have created NEFSAS in order for people to access education. So how much more should you see that this is totally, you cannot mistaken 1,400 Rand for 14 million Rand. It's impossible. Absolutely. So this is clear corruption. And I hope there's zero tolerance. Specifically, it's not enough to say that the student is going to pay the money back. They need to find the person who transferred the money, find the whole ring of whoever's involved, and they must go straight to court to go and account for what they've done.
Professor Friedman, the lessons that need to be learned here, I understand this has opened a whole can of worms like Tebogo is alluding.
Oh, well, I think we've said, look, the only comment I have on the student, I broadly agree with Tebogo that she's not the issue, but I mean, we do have to ask questions about a country in which we have so much poverty and we have this absolute culture of conspicuous consumption. You are judged as a South African by whether you own iPhones and fashion goods, etc., when people can't afford bread, and that is a major problem in our society. But beyond that, as Tebogo is implying, there is a very simple explanation for how money lands up in accounts like that, and that is criminal activity, that people are putting the money there in order to defraud the system. And all I can say, obviously we must be guided by evidence, but if you look at the public debate, there is a widespread perception that that is the case. And these service providers are very much, I absolutely agree with Tinyeku that, you know, Trillian and Intellimali are the same problem. Because on what basis do you need some private company to come and do what you should be doing as a public institution as well? I mean, the biggest scandal in this country at the moment is cash paymaster services. We're not prepared to pay out social grants ourselves so we get some multinational company, which according to the Constitutional Court doesn't even have any BEE credentials, to come and do it for us. This is an indication of a major rot in the way we do things in this country, and we really need to use opportunities like this to change what we do.
And the minister was also not aware that they were using those service
Well, the
providers.
minister should be aware.
He should be very well aware. And the student claims that she actually reported and the university did nothing about it. So now it's her word against everybody else's. Fears of violence and economic instability mount as Kenya faces an election rerun. Find out what's going to happen after the break. Media Monitor welcomes you back. Kenya's Supreme Court announced on Friday that it had annulled the result of last month's election. Chief Justice David Maraga cited irregularities with the results and has called for a fresh round of elections within 60 days. The Election Commission had declared President Uhuru Kenyatta the winner of the election by a margin of 1.4 million votes. However, the opposition argued that the Commission's IT system had been hacked to manipulate the results. Let's take a look at this clip.
The ruling is a first of its kind in Kenya's political history.
Is hereby issued directing the first respondent to organize and conduct a fresh presidential election in strict conformity with the Constitution and the applicable election laws within 60 days. In his petition, Odinga had sought to prove that the tallying and transmission of results was marred by irregularities.
This indeed is a very historic day for the people of Kenya.
Kenyatta pledged to abide by the decision, but argued that the court had disregarded the will of the voters.
I respect it. I disagree with it because, as I have said, millions of Kenyans queued, made their choice, and 6 people have decided that they will go against the will of the people.
The verdict was backed by 4 out of 6 judges and immediately sent Odinga's supporters onto the streets in wild celebrations. Odinga's supporters clearly excited by that decision. They say this time they hope that the election will be carried out in a free, fair and credible manner. The opposition now says the Electoral Commission cannot be trusted to hold the upcoming presidential elections. Chairman of the Commission, Wafula Chebukati, told a press conference that he will not resign. Sarah Kimani, SABC News, Kenya.
Prof. Maluleko, what do you make of the latest developments in Kenya, a historical ruling by the Supreme Court indeed?
It is precedent setting, and I think it is encouraging to see a judiciary that is as courageous as the Kenyan Supreme Court has indicated. It is arguably one of the first on the African continent. Let's face it, elections are a painful phenomenon in many, many countries in Africa, and that a Supreme Court was able to have this kind of courage is commendable. It is a pity that President Uhuru Kenyatta didn't stop at saying he respects the finding of the court. even if he had stopped after saying he disagrees with it, but he respects it. But then to talk about 6 people going against the will of the people, that was a bit low. It was totally unnecessary. It was Trump-like kind of statement. And I hope that he will speak in slightly better terms. Because I listened to the whole speech that he gave, and it wasn't a bad speech, if only he had known where to stop and what not to say. But for Kenya, this is momentous. And one hopes that there will not be more deaths in the days to come, because far too many Africans die at elections unnecessarily, prematurely, and needlessly.
Absolutely. And this brings back the question of whether or not the bloody 2007 elections could also have been rigged, Prof?
Well, of course, it does raise that question. I mean, you have to remember that the background to this election was that days before the election, a senior IT person at the Electoral Commission was found tortured and murdered. And I mean, that raises obvious questions. Look, I think we're absolutely right to say this is a momentous event. But I think as Tinyeku is saying, what is worrying is how do we interpret those comments by President Kenyatta? Yeah. Because if it's simply an expression of irritation and we move on,
crooks.
That's fine. No, but he's saying it's this old argument that the judges mustn't interfere with the will of the people. But that's a total misunderstanding of what's going on, because the judges are saying it wasn't really the will of the people because you didn't do it properly. And that's what judges are there for. So really what he's trying to say is that judges must simply accept whatever the Electoral Commission says, which would mean that you might as well not have judges in Kenya. But I repeat, the issue is it's obviously an unacceptable statement. The hopeful interpretation, I mean, I was in Kenya earlier this year and people were legitimately very concerned about a repeat of the violence of 2007. And I think a lot of that will depend on whether President Kenyatta is simply getting angry or whether this is going to be used later on to undermine the legitimacy of the election. And if it is, then Kenya is in very serious trouble.
Tebogo, what does this mean? I mean, we know that African elections in particular are always fought with allegations that this one did this, they didn't follow the processes, and we actually never get those reports as to, after those commissions have investigated, what was the outcome? And now this landmark ruling, what do you think it says for the rest of the African continent, not just for the political parties, politicians, but for the voters as well?
Well, it shows us the importance of an independent judiciary, and I think I agree 100% with my colleagues. If you look at the situation within Kenya, I think we should also look at the electronic voting system. I was a bit shocked to hear that people were voting via SMS, some were voting by taking a picture and sending it through, and others were voting on ballot papers that didn't have a barcode. So these are the kinds of things that I think as African leaders, they need to come together and talk about the basic standards of elections that we should have so that we can always elect leaders that the people want. We cannot have leaders who are manipulating the system, hacking into systems, as Professor Freedom said, also torturing, electoral officials and murdering them. I would actually like to see African governments come out strongly and come out with statements to say, they support the decision of the judiciary, and they encourage, the people of Kenya to continue with a fresh run of elections, and we trust that they will be free and fair. And if they are not, I think there should be accountability measures within the continent because it affects us.
Guys, what about the high-level observer mission that was sent to Kenya who assured the world that those elections were free and fair?
No, Tebogo was absolutely right about that. Look, I've been studying this for years. Electoral observers are in the free and fair business. Okay, they go around declaring it free and fair, and the reason they declare it free and fair is then they've had enough cocktails and they can go home. No, we laugh about this. I know in our 1994 election, I know of observer missions which never left their five-star hotel, not once. Okay. They sat there watching television. I think that one of the biggest scams in elections throughout the world is observer missions. And thank heaven we have a situation in our country, in Kenya, where the courts, which are serious institutions, can actually comment on elections rather than these very strange delegates.
Professor Maluleke, your closing statement today, please.
Yeah, look, I think that sometimes observer missions are too hasty in declaring elections free and fair because they just want to avoid trouble. They think that if they say that, there will not be violence in the country. And that's why I admire the Supreme Court of Kenya, because it must have dawned on them that, you know, the easier thing to do would be to say, let's leave things as they are for the sake of peace. But what kind of peace is that? You know, what kind of peace is it which is built on a lie? And I think it is time that African countries begin to realize that true peace after an election comes only when the election is itself substantially free and fair and not merely declared hastily as free and fair.
All right, thank you so much, Professor Tenyeko Maluleke, joining us from our Pretoria studios. In studio with me, Professor Stephen Friedman, and of course, Mr. Tebogo Ditseho. You can go with your cocktails now. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to not leave you, but I'm going to take you straight, of course, to the 9th BRICS Summit that is starting today in China. Let's go live for those details.
To seize opportunities and meet challenges. Economic cooperation is the foundation of the BRICS mechanism. With this focus in mind, we should implement the strategy for BRICS economic partnership, institutionalize and substantiate cooperation in various sectors, and continue to enhance the performance of BRICS cooperation. This year, we have made progress in the operation of the new development bank and contingent reserve arrangement, and also in e-commerce, trade and investment facilitation, trading services, local currency bond issuance, scientific and technological innovation, industrial cooperation, and public-private partnership. Thus expanding and intensify economic cooperation. We should continue to implement agreements and consensus already reached, and better leverage the role of current mechanisms. We should also actively explore new ways and new areas of practical cooperation and strengthen our ties in order to ensure durable and fruitful BRICS cooperation. Second, we BRICS countries should shoulder our responsibilities to uphold global peace and stability. Peace and development underpin and reinforce each other. People around the world want peace and cooperation, not conflict or confrontation. Thanks to the joint efforts of all countries, global peace has reigned for more than half a century. However, incessant conflicts in some parts of the world and hotspot issues are posing challenges to world peace. The intertwined threats of terrorism and the lack of cybersecurity, among others, have cast a dark shadow over the world. We BRICS countries are committed to upholding global peace and contributing to the international security order. This year, we have held the meeting of High Representatives for Security Affairs and also the meeting of foreign ministers. We have put in place the regular meeting mechanism for our permanent representatives to multilateral institutions and convened the Foreign Policy Planning Dialogue, the meeting of Counterterrorism Working Group, the meeting of Cybersecurity Working Group, and the consultation on peacekeeping operations. These efforts aim to strengthen consultation and coordination on major international and regional issues, and also build synergy among BRICS countries. We should uphold the purposes and principles of the UN Charter and the basic norms governing international relations, firmly support multilateralism, work for greater democracy in international relations, and oppose hegemonism and power politics. We should foster the vision of common, comprehensive, cooperative, and sustainable security, and take a constructive part in the process of resolving geopolitical hotspot issues and make our due contributions. I am convinced that as long as we take a holistic approach to fighting terrorism in all its forms and address both its symptoms and root causes, terrorists will have no place to hide. When dialogue, consultation, and negotiation are conducted to create conditions for achieving political settlement of issues such as Syria, Libya, and the Palestine-Israel conflict, the flame of war can be put out, and displaced refugees will eventually return to their homes. Third, we, BRICS countries, should contribute to enhancing global economic governance. Only openness delivers progress, and only inclusiveness sustains such progress. Due to sluggish global growth in recent years, such issues as uneven development, inadequate governance, and the deficit of fairness have become more acute. And protectionism and inward-looking mentality are on the rise. The global economy and the global economic governance system, having entered a period of adjustment, face new challenges. We should not ignore problems arising from economic globalization or just complain about them. Rather, we should make joint efforts to find solutions. We should work together with the other members of the international community to step up dialogue, coordination, and cooperation, and contribute to upholding and securing global economic stability and growth. To this end, we should promote the building of an open global economy, advance trade and investment liberalization and facilitation, jointly build new global value chains, and rebalance economic globalization. Doing so will bring benefits to people across the world. We 5 countries should open more to each other and expand convergent interests in this process. We should take an inclusive approach and share opportunities together so as to create even brighter prospects for growing the economies of the 5 countries. The development of emerging market and developing countries is not intended to move the cheese of anyone, but to make the pie of the global economy bigger. We should join hands to steer the course of economic globalization, offer more vision and public goods, make the governance model and the rules more balanced and inclusive, and improve and reshape international division of labor and the global value chains. We should work to reform the global economic governance system to make it commensurate with the reality of the global economic architecture. We should also improve governance rules for the new domains of deep sea, polar regions, outer space, and cyberspace, so as to ensure that all countries share both rights and responsibilities. Fourth, we should increase the influence of BRICS and build extensive partnerships. As a cooperation platform with global influence, BRICS cooperation is more than about our 5 countries. Rather, it carries the expectations of emerging market and developing countries, and indeed the entire international community. Guided by the principle of open and inclusive cooperation, we BRICS countries place high premium on cooperation with other emerging market and developing countries, and we have established effective dialogue mechanisms with them. As a Chinese saying goes, it is easy to break one arrow, but hard to break 10 arrows bundled together. We should leverage our respective strength and influence, promote South-South cooperation and a North-South dialogue, pool the collective strength of all countries, and jointly diffuse risks and meet challenges. We should expand the coverage of BRICS cooperation and deliver its benefits to more people. We should promote the BRICS Plus cooperation approach and build an open and a diversified network of development partnerships to get more emerging market and developing countries involved in our concerted endeavors for cooperation and mutual benefits. During the Xiamen Summit, China will hold the dialogue of emerging market and developing countries, where leaders of 5 countries from different regions will be invited to join the BRICS leaders in discussing global development cooperation and South-South cooperation, as well as the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Mutual understanding and friendship among peoples is crucial to enhancing BRICS cooperation and building extensive partnerships. We should fully leverage the role of people-to-people and cultural exchanges and encourage extensive public participation in BRICS cooperation. We should hold more events like movie festivals, cultural festivals, and sports games that are popular among the people, so that the BRICS story will be told everywhere, and the exchanges and friendship of the peoples of all 5 countries will become an inexhaustible source of strength, driving BRICS cooperation. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, the past decade has not only seen solid progress in the BRICS cooperation mechanism, it has also witnessed the unfolding of all-round reform and opening up in China, and its rapid economic and social development. Over these 10 years, China's economic aggregate has grown by 239%, and its total volume of exports and imports in goods risen by 73%. China has become the world's 2nd largest economy. The lives of its 1.3 billion plus people have been significantly improved, and China has made increasingly greater contribution to both regional and global economic development. It is true that as China's reform endeavors have entered a crucial stage where tough challenges must be met, some underlying difficulties and problems have surfaced. They must be addressed with resolve and determination. As an old Chinese saying goes, effective medicine tastes bitter. The medicine that we have prescribed for ourselves is to carry out all-round reform. Over the past 5 years, we have adopted over 1,500 reform measures, uncovering all sectors, with breakthroughs made in multiple areas, and the reform is being pursued with greater intensity. The pace of economic structural adjustment and industrial upgrading has accelerated. China's economy has maintained a steady and sound performance, and the new drivers sustaining development have grown in strength. In the first half of this year, China's economy grew by 6.9%. The value added from services accounted for 54.1% of the GDP. 7.35 million urban jobs were created. All these achievements have proven that deepening all-round reform is the right path that we should continue to follow. Going forward, China will continue to put into practice the vision of innovative, coordinated, green, open, and inclusive development. We will adapt to and steer the new normal of economic development, push forward supply-side structural reform, accelerate the building of a new system for an open economy, drive economic development with innovation, and achieve sustainable development. China will stay firmly committed to peaceful development and make even greater contribution to global peace and development. Last May, China successfully hosted the Belt and Road Forum for International Cooperation, which was attended by 29 heads of state or government, and also over 1,600 representatives from more than 140 countries and 80+ international organizations. This ushered in a new stage of translating the Belt and Road Initiative from vision to action and from planning to implementation. Foreign participants discussed the ways of promoting cooperation and development and reached broad consensus. Let me make this clear. The Belt and Road Initiative is not a tool to advance any geopolitical agenda, but a platform for practical cooperation. It is not a foreign aid scheme, but an initiative for interconnected development which calls for extensive consultation, joint contribution, and shared benefits. I am convinced that the Belt and Road Initiative will serve as a new platform for all countries to achieve win-win cooperation, and that it will create new opportunities for implementing the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The business community of BRICS countries is the main force driving our economic development. Over the last decade, you have incorporated your business development into BRICS cooperation, thus making important contribution to forging BRICS economic partnerships. The reason why we are holding the business forum on the eve of the summit is to solicit your views and advice, so that we can work together to make the Xiamen Summit a success and enable BRICS cooperation to deliver. I hope you will leverage your strength in terms of information, technology, and funding to launch more practical and mutually beneficial cooperation projects that benefit our countries and peoples. What you do will help spur economic and social development and improve people's lives. The Chinese government will continue to encourage Chinese companies to operate and take root in other countries. And likewise, we also warmly welcome foreign companies to invest and operate in China. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, we BRICS countries will enter a second decade of more vibrant growth. Let us work together with other members of the international community. Let our cooperation deliver more benefits to the peoples of our 5 countries. Let the benefits of global peace and development reach all the people in the world. In conclusion, I wish the Business Forum every success. Thank you. I thank His Excellency President Xi Jinping for that important speech. In his speech, President Xi analyzed the current world economic situation, took stock of the achievements of BRICS cooperation, drew up the blueprint for future BRICS cooperation, and also charted a course for deepening economic cooperation among BRICS countries. His speech also boosted the confidence of the business communities of BRICS and all other countries for deepening mutually beneficial and win-win cooperation. Let us express our heartfelt thanks to His Excellency President Xi Jinping with another warm applause. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the end of the opening ceremony of the 2017 BRICS Business Forum. Thank you.
女士们、先生们，请全体起立，再次以热烈的掌声向习近平主席阁下表示衷心的感谢。Ladies and gentlemen, please rise and give a warm round of applause to President Xi Jinping for his time. 请就座 ，Please be seated. 开幕式到此结束。下一
The opening ceremony is concluded. The next session will start soon.
We will start the next session immediately.
Please remain seated. 下一节将由巴西总统米歇尔·特维尔阁下、南非总统雅各布·祖马阁下发表演讲，中国贸促会会长姜增伟先生主持。Next.